Today's webinar is going to be on the overview of the VR process. Over the last several months, Jamie has been working her tail off and completing some products and tools that we're developing that are going to talk about the VR process from beginning to end. And this is going to be the overview of that. And here's our credentials and our alphabet soup and all that fun stuff. Here's the webinar objectives. Okay, so what we're looking at is we want to increase the understanding of the importance of knowing and implementing the steps of the VR process. This is the backbone of everything we do. This is what guides us as we provide services to consumers that are eligible and need assistance in getting employment. We are also going to look at how each step of the VR process supports the next step in the provision of VR services. So this isn't willy-nilly pick this, pick that to get people employed. There's an actual process to what we do. And we're going to show you how that process supports each of the future steps that are coming. It's also going to give you an example or an understanding of the alignment of case management practices with the VR process. And what that means is we've developed a series of examples that are going to go with the VR process slides. So we're going to talk about the VR process. Jamie's going to go through the products that she's developed. And at the end of that, I'm going to bring forward the examples that I'm working on. The ultimate end goal here is that you're going to have products and tools that are going to be available on the web that show the VR process, give you some guidance through that process. And then we're also going to be producing a case file example. And it's going to have everything from application through case closure. I've worked up some post-employment stuff. I've worked up some amendments and other forms that go along with our process as we go through this. And that stuff is coming in the future. So stay tuned. All right, Jamie, I'm sure people are tired of hearing me already, so I'm going to let you take over.
No, we love to hear you talk, Wayne. I want to welcome everyone and thanks for joining us. I see a ton of hellos and introductions and in the chat box, and just want to say hello to everyone and thank you for joining us. And we're excited to present this overview of the VR process. And as Wayne had said, we've been working as a team, the entire AverTech team, on this VR process resource materials and resources project. And so we've broken down each step of the VR process and developed materials and tools and resources for that specific step of the VR process. So today we're just going to go over all the steps and a general definition or description of what that step is. But in the future, if you'll continue to join us, we're going to be rolling out the tool and products that are associated with each step of the VR process so that you would have some on-hand resources in your office. So let's start with step one, outreach and referral. When we first started working on this last year, one of our team members, which everyone knows, Winona, she said, well, what is the first step of the VR process? And we kind of did a little survey. We did an in-office survey, and then we did a survey among the programs, and we got a variety of answers. And I think the majority of us felt that even though a lot of us think that referral is where the VR process starts, it actually starts with outreach in your community. So outreach is often seen as the initial step in the VR process. And that means you're providing and establishing your communications in your community. You're promoting awareness about your program, and an understanding of what VR services are. And, letting your referral sources know what is an appropriate referral. You're letting potential consumers know what it is that you do. So outreach is providing all of this information about your program and your services and eligibility requirements to the community. Anybody have any comments?
Jamie?
Yes.
Jamie and Wayne. Good morning, everyone out there. This is Lee Geshelma, one of the co-directors for Evertech. And I'm
Hey
just
there. I'm sorry, Lee. I would have introduced you. I didn't know you were on.
I just got on. But
Okay.
what I want to request from the participants who are not calling in from your office phone numbers to provide your name and your program name. And this is for reporting purposes. When we prepare the final usage name of the participants, it will only show your phone number and not your name nor your program name. So if you could do that for us, that would certainly help us. Also, if more than one person is attending the webinar with you, please include their name as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And welcome. I'm glad you joined us.
Yes, thank you.
Everyone. So we go on to continue to talk about outreach. Outreach is a very proactive and an intentional effort on your part to connect with your community and to allow your community to know more about your goals, the practices that your program, uses, different types of outreaches, contacting organization groups, individuals, and using things to reach individuals in the community, such as brochures, um, your website, different types of outreach tools to further educate the community and potential consumers and referral sources, and how that they can access your program services. So we talk about in outreach, different activities, meeting with individuals from different Native organizations, any of your social services agencies, medical institutions, educational institutions, any job placement agencies, and local employers. And as you're looking at this list of individuals that we talk about reaching out to, you'll notice that the majority of these are where your referrals come from. And this helps your office and your program to be able to receive what we call appropriate referrals.
So as director, a lot of times we're challenged with how do we get out there and how do we do these referrals? How do we do outreach? How do we um, get the education out there in the communities for the appropriate referrals? And one of my favorite things to do was to piggyback off of any other community events that are taking place, like if they're having health fairs or um, like at the powwow, we set up a booth and go out there. The other thing that I like to do was I'd put on a feed, so the staff and I would cook and bring food, um, and then we would get a lot of people to come in, and before we'd give them their food, they had to listen to my spiel, so we trapped them. It was great, and that was how we did a lot of orientation or outreach and education to the program at where I was at. And so here's the a sample face sheet of what a referral form can look like. And of course, this is all typed out because we're doing it one-sided, but we used to get these from referrals. They're all handwritten and that type of thing. So this is just a basic face sheet. Again, it has the personal information of the individual's date of birth. Jonathan, I'm doing it different. So that kind of sets the tone. He's going to do things different this time. He's coming in to see us, and it has his directions to his home, his information on how to contact him, and he talks a little bit about his disability. When I walk into a place, they see me gimping and don't want to hire me. I've been blacklisted in the community because of my past behaviors. And this is a pretty standard referral that we get in our communities. We got a lot of people that have some physical disabilities, and they have a history in the community because we have small communities and people know them. So this is why I chose a lot of this information for this type of referral face sheet. Any questions or
Wayne?
comments?
Yes, Wayne.
Yeah.
Do you recall Sonia Turner informing us that it's important for the AVERS program to obtain the physical address of a applicant or consumer and not rely on a PO box number?
Yep. And that's coming up in the next set of forms.
Okay. And the other thing is you do on this form have directions included with one program that I worked with here in Arizona, actually the Native Independent Living Center, where our primary clients were the elderly. And with the remote and isolation of the communities, we would ask them to draw us a map, which sometimes help. Or you could be out there for 2 hours trying to locate
just driving in
someone.
circles.
Yes, and I have personally experienced that. So just sharing some comments.
And Lee, that you bring up a great point that we will be getting to in the next series of forms. So thank you for that. Any other comments or questions on this type of face sheet or referral form? I see we got some comments. Karen says that you guys do outreach to the reintegration programs, probation, parole, wellness courts, drug and mental health court systems. Awesome.
Great sources of referral. And, you know, when we're looking at referral sources, you know, you don't want them just saying, here, go on down to Voc Rehab. They have money. You actually want your referral sources to know what your program is about and what we're doing. So
They just cut a check. They just give you cash. They got it right there at the front desk.
Hey, I believe me, as a counselor, I know I've had people show up and say, "Oh, I just came for hearing aids and glasses. I don't want to go to work." So, you know, we really have to make sure that we educate our referral sources on what it is we actually do. So once you've received a referral, you're probably going to want to contact that individual and invite them to your program for an orientation. And I think we have a variety of different scenarios for orientation. Some programs use an individual one-on-one orientation approach, which I prefer because I feel like that in our communities, a lot of times we don't want to share with others about our disability. And so in a group setting, sometimes it can become, and we have a small network in our communities. And so some people just don't want to share, you know, that much personal information in a group setting. But I know some programs prefer a group setting because it's easier to set up one orientation a week or one every 2 weeks, and everyone knows that's the day that orientation is held, and there's no surprises about the date and time. So, you know, for various reasons, you know, it's up to your program how you want to handle your orientation. But during orientation, the applicant is going to learn about, you know, what types of things are required of them. They're going to learn about the services that you provide and what your policies are and your procedures and how things work. You're going to educate the potential applicant about their responsibilities as a consumer and the program's responsibilities and the VR counselor's responsibilities. And you're also going to provide them information about their rights and remedies and educate them more about the VR process. So, you know, if you have someone show up for just glasses and a hearing aid, this would be the time that you educate them on what you actually do.
Jamie,
Yes.
one other recommendation that we've talked about and shared with the programs is for reporting purposes, we recommend to the program directors and support staff to have a sign-in sheet. And it's also useful to prepare a one-page survey to get feedback on your provision of services regarding uh, orientation.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you, Lee, for bringing that up. And as we continue these trainings on each step of the VR process, we will delve, and take a deep dive into what it means to provide services in that particular step of the VR process. But yes, thank you, Lee. You want to go on to the next slide? So during the orientation, if you have a potential applicant decide that they want to proceed and complete an application, they'll fill out that application and sign that application. And this is generally what we call the intake meeting, or and sometimes orientation and intake will go hand in hand. It's definitely up to the VR counselor or the program staff how to handle that process. Some programs only have orientation, and as Lee mentioned, providing additional information during that time for them to make a decision. But some programs will have orientation and intake all together. So you'll do the orientation piece. I've worked in VR offices where we showed a video about VR, and that was considered the orientation. And then immediately following, the decision was made whether that individual wanted to apply for services. And so, you're going to establish your own system for orientations. So, options could include having a weekly or monthly orientation session, individual, as I said earlier, or group sessions, depending on how your program organizes and set up your orientation and intake.
So Jamie, I want to jump in here real quick. One point that I always like to stress with the CFR, regulation and all that fun stuff, is that an applicant can demand to fill out an application the day they come in. And as the VR provider, we are required to provide them the opportunity to fill out that application. We can set it up to where you can do the application at the end of the orientation. You can set it up for an application appointment, but ultimately know that if the consumer demands to fill out an application that day, we have to provide them access to that. When I worked at the state offices, we had a counselor on rotation every day. That was their responsibility. We always had one person available to fill out an application with an individual if they came in and requested it. And it's just something to be aware of. That gets lost sometimes in the shuffle when we're talking about orientation and intake. Mm-hmm. And the orientation, like Jamie was talking about, whether it's a group or individual, we've always been able to use this as a great management tool for workflow, for caseload flow. So if we had a bunch of people that were getting referred that were inappropriate, like, and previously Jamie was talking about the inappropriate referrals. If we had a high volume of inappropriate referrals coming in, we'd start doing orientations on a weekly basis. And the information we provided in that orientation would let them know, and they would self-determine that they weren't at the right office. And so then that really cut down on our missed appointments or inappropriate referral application appointments. And it streamlined our process and got us on track to where we were serving the consumers that were eligible in a quicker fashion. So our wait time went down. And then I've also set it up to where we didn't individualize meetings with clients or consumers, where they'd come in and sit down with a counselor one-on-one, fill out the application, all the forms, and then they would be able to have, the signatures and all that stuff gathered. So just wanted to point that out, Jamie.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Wayne. And that is good information to remember when you're setting up your orientations. So we're going to talk, about informed choice. And we know that informed choice is provided throughout the VR process, the opportunity for informed choice. And as we discuss this, the conversation came up that informed choice is not given. It's not something that you allow someone to have or to take. It's just understood. And so American Indians who are applicants for this program are determined to be eligible to receive services. And they must be active and full partners in the vocational rehabilitation process, making meaningful and informed choices. And this is directly from the CFR. So we want to make sure that informed choice provides the following. And it is required throughout the evaluation and assessment, the services needed and providers available, and also throughout the development of the vocational goals and responsibilities. So we want to make sure that we are thinking about informed choice throughout the entire process, not just at the beginning. I think some of us get hung up on informed choice at the very beginning, and then we kind of lose our way as we develop the case. But this needs to always be in the back of our minds as we're working. Lee or Wayne, either one of you want to add to that?
No, I think you got it right. Informed choice, it's through critical points of the the case file life that we provide that opportunity for the individual to exercise their right to look at all the options and make a decision. I think it's great. You captured it really well.
Okay. And then we go on to talk more about informed choice. So the services needed to address the consumer's impediments to employment and to prepare them for gainful employment. These are all things that are included in informed choice. The service providers available, the methods used to procure such services, consumers who require or request assistance in exercising informed choice must also be offered support services to assist them in this process. And consumers may choose to involve family members, advocates, and other authorized representatives throughout the AVERS process. So, as we said, we want to continue thinking about this as we develop the case. And I know myself personally, as a VR counselor, when it came to service providers, I always felt like it was very important to hold that first meeting with the service provider and the consumer, because you don't want to just say to the consumer, this is who's going to provide your services. You want them to be able to say, yeah, I want to work with this individual, or I feel comfortable in this setting. So, that's just one aspect of informed choice. And so then we get to application and eligibility. During the application step of the VR process, information is used to determine the applicant's eligibility or ineligibility for VR services. And we gather that information during the intake. Whenever we're processing any documentation that's brought in to the intake meeting, this information is going to include some of the following: the disability type, any work experience that the consumer may have, any academic achievements, education levels, any education history, social involvement, medical history, and legal history. We want to make sure that we gather as much information during the intake and application so that we can move right into eligibility determination.
And we have our public service announcement. No, I'm just kidding. We have to, and as we go through this part, this is where we really start to have to pay attention to confidentiality. As we're gathering this information, remember we are providing confidentiality to the consumers. We do it during outreach and referral and intake, but it really becomes prevalent and it has to remain at the front of our minds when we get to this step, the application. We're gathering information that's private. And it has to stay private. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you, Wayne. Yes. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And as I said, when we go into each step of the VR process and hold additional trainings on each step, we're going to delve into that even more, the confidentiality piece. So the VR counselor must determine the applicant's eligibility or ineligibility within 60 days after an application is completed and submitted. An individual is considered to have applied for AVER services when the applicant has completed, signed, and submitted the application. So at the time that the application is signed, the clock starts ticking.
By the consumer.
Say again?
By the consumer.
By the consumer, that's correct.
Yep. It's the clock is all on the consumer side. So this is a huge red flag for programs that mail out their applications and the client or the consumer has a signature line and they sign it and then they forget to mail it for 3 weeks. You are 3 weeks behind the 8 ball now. You only have 4 weeks left to determine eligibility. So, or 5 weeks left to determine eligibility. So make sure that when you're doing your mail out applications, there's either no signature line on it that you would do an interview with the individual to get a signature, or there's some way to track that that's being done correctly, because you have 60 days from the time the consumer signs the application. And a lot of programs that we've been working with or talked to is that this is a huge issue for them, that they're just now realizing that they've been out of compliance because they've been going off of the counselor's signature or the date that they receive it at the VR office and they stamp it as received, and that's incorrect. The clock starts ticking when the consumer signs that applicant signs that application to become a consumer.
That's right.
So, and Anita, to answer your question, that it's received by the VR office, and that, sorry, I'm getting a bunch of notes. So it said there, we might have to clarify that. So I will reach out to RSA and clarify that, unless we have somebody on from RSA that can clarify it right now. But they're saying from the time it's received in the office, but then I've also heard that it's from the time the consumer signs it. So let's hold on for that one, and I'll get back to you. I'll reach out to RSA and we'll get clarification. We'll send it out to everybody that's been registered for this, so that we can make sure we get everybody.
I'm almost certain that it's when the applicant signs, but yes, we will clarify that for you.
Excuse me, Jamie.
Yes.
Hi, this is Brenda Sanapa from Menominee, vocational in Wisconsin. My understanding to, just as it says on here, the VR must determine the eligibility or ineligibility within the 60-day calendar of the application, which is correct. But within that 60 days, when you're doing your the application intake, and that's during the time when you do your release it. Well, this is what we do: release information to send for their documentation of their specific disability.
That's
so
correct.
Within that 60 calendar day, and once we get back the medical documentation determining that yes, they do have that specific or specifics of different disabilities, at that point in time is when they're considered eligible.
That's right. And you
So
determine
we send,
eligibility after the application is signed. So once that application is signed, then you will be getting your releases, your medical documentation, and you may want to do that before they sign the application. Some people do that during the intake process.
correct, because that's, with Manami, that's what we do is once we do the referral, and that's just basically asking the questions if they feel that this program is going to help them in their situation.
Mhm.
Or would they like resources on the outside that might help with their situation, depending on
right.
whatever it is.
That's right.
Then we do the application part, and within that application process is where the ROIs release information. We send for the medical documentation, and in our area, it usually takes a week to a week and a half to get the answer back. And then we determine if it's compatible with what they say, that they become eligible.
That's
But
wonderful.
within this time, we also send them, we have created a format for a plan of employment that we send with them for, questionnaires on them as to, what is their plan of their process to
Mm,
be successful.
that's
And
right.
once we get that, with the IEP, individual plan of employment.
Absolutely. So
So
you're
all
going to
that
be
is,
thinking,
go ahead.
you want to be thinking about all of these things during the orientation and intake
Correct.
step of the VR process. You want to get your disclosures and your releases forms signed. If they have medical documentation on hand, you want to go ahead and collect them during the intake. And you want to possibly even be considering an extension. You said that you get your documentation in a week and a half. Well, that's pretty amazing because
Well,
I've had
because
to, I've
it's
had to
our
wait months
reservation
for
is,
documentation.
everything is right here. So, and we
And then
collaborate with everybody.
that's
I also
right.
wanted to point out, we also collaborate with state. So we work very well with state, and we have a set up office for them to come visit they come 3 times or 2 times out of the month to our office. So we collaborate with them also.
Wonderful. And
And
so
so,
during your doing your intake, you definitely want to get those releases signed. And you may want to consider some other things to do during your intake meeting as well. I'm not sure if you do it in your office, but some offices go ahead and do voter registration because sometimes that's a requirement. Sometimes you may go ahead and do your CAP, your client assistance program information to provide the consumer during that intake appointment. Um, you may have to determine if this is going to be a pre-ETS case. You may look at that or determine what type. Is it going to be a general case or is it going to be a mental health case? Or so there's a lot of things that take place during that intake interview and that intake meeting. And not only just signing the application, but
correct,
collecting all of that information as well.
correct.
And then I also, as a counselor, gave homework to the consumer. I felt like that not only did we provide brochures about TVR, we also talked about labor market surveys, did some informational interviewing. This will motivate your consumer to be more involved in their case. So if from the very beginning they're involved, um, you're going to probably have a lot better outcome of this particular case. And if they are not going to be involved, these things, if you give them homework to do labor market surveys and informational interviewing and things like that, and the consumer doesn't return these items to you at the follow-up appointment, then you might even consider closing out that case right from there.
So to throw another curveball, right? Because that's what I like to do sometimes. Let's bring COVID into this now. So we've had several discussions and several trainings on COVID and how that's impacting our ability to interact with our consumer base and our participants. And to go along with this eligibility question or application question, currently the required signature has been deemed not required at this point because of COVID. So an email signature or email recognition of that, or a text message to be printed with that can go with it. So you can fill out your application via phone or virtual, and then just make sure that you have some sort of documentation showing the consumer was involved in that, and that you can take and put it with your application showing that that signature is on an electronic format. We've also seen forms that are being created in like Adobe. So you got the PDF signature option. So that, but the big picture that we're running into is that we don't have a lot of consumers that have the same level of technology or understanding of how to use that technology or the new programs that are available. So just getting that confirmation through a text or an email will suffice at this moment. Once COVID is addressed and things kind of come back to where we can do a standard application, then we'll probably have another discussion about the requirement of signatures at that point. So we got a bunch of comments here in the chat box. I think we need to stop and take a look at. Jamie.
Sure. I was reading them. So Amanda, let's see, let me make sure I don't miss out anyone. Joanna made a statement. She said, per federal regs, it's from the time the consumer or participant signs the application. And I think we addressed that already, and I think the majority of us agreed. Anita says, in regards to COVID situation, is there any information on whether RSA will extend the 60-day requirement, because some medical records office personnel or other personnel that have records we need for eligibility are not working on a regular schedule and may not be there to expedite our requests?
So in that situation, in that situation, we go back to an appropriate reason to extend an eligibility determination. And the inavailability to get that medical documentation would fall under the category of an appropriate reason to extend. And we actually will talk about the extension of eligibility in a little bit. That's part of the process, and we have some forms that we're developing to go with that. So to answer your question, yes, that is an allowable extension reason. And you know, Amanda, I agree. You lose at least a week or more if holidays or for mail, and that's one of the issues that we're running into. So I think, you know, definitely we want to get some clarification, and I'll get that information back out to everybody. I was always under the impression from CFR that it was from the signature of the consumer. That's the way I was trained, and that's the way I was understanding the CFR. So I will ask for clarification from RSA, and we'll get that response back out to you. Rachel, pre-COVID, we considered an application submitted and started the clock, even if they only signed the front page, because the first page is the application. Okay, so that was, and so in a lot of programs, that's very correct. I mean, you got the one-page application, and then the rest of it is all part of your interview. It's your case, your comprehensive assessment of the case to determine eligibility. That's all included in that gathering of the information. So the intake is done before the application to inform the consumer about the whole process and the ROI process. Yes. So yes and no. Ethel, what the intake is an educational component of the application and the beginning of the relationship with that consumer or participant. So you are sharing that information with them. It doesn't have to take place before the application. It can be done during the application to provide that information of the ROI and the informed choice and all that fun stuff. Casey, thank you. RSA addressed it in May. Right, and I think I addressed that, Rachel, with you. Not all of them, you know, the state has a 15-page application in Montana, if I remember correctly, and I don't know why you need that many pages. Well, you know, but whatever. So but a lot of programs have a one-page application. I had a one-page. I guess it was a two-page. I'll be showing you that here in a minute. So it's just based on what you feel your program needs.
Amanda says, I guess we're doing extensions on all of our clients.
At this point, I think probably a lot of the programs
Probably
are
so.
because of COVID. You're right.
Yeah. So when we talk about assessment, we're talking about additional documentation that's required to verify an applicant's disability status, or perhaps an external assessment process needs to take place after the application is received and prior to the eligibility determination. And if you go on to the next slide, we'll talk more about exactly what does that mean. So a diagnostic assessment serves several purposes. First of all, you're going to determine if the applicant has a physical or mental impairment that constitutes a substantial impediment to employment. You're also going to determine whether the anticipated services will have a discernible impact on the ability to obtain, maintain, or retain employment. And we're also identifying and evaluating essential characteristics of the causes of the barriers in preparing for obtaining, maintaining, or retaining employment. And, you know, a lot of these assessments, there's so many different types of assessments. There's psychological evaluations, there's vocational evaluations, there are physical limitations, functional limitations assessments. There's just so many different types of assessments, but you're going to gather in that intake and application process enough information that you're going to be able to make a decision on what type of additional assessments may need to take place. You know, if the consumer has all of their medical documentation in a nice file and they bring it to the office when they apply and they hand it to you and they have a diagnosis, a doctor that diagnosed it, a date it was diagnosed, then you know, you're pretty fortunate. But in most cases, you're going to have to do additional assessments to determine eligibility. Sorry, Wayne, I got on a tear there.
Oh, now I just hit the mouse and it went crazy. Hold on. All right, here we go.
Okay.
There we go.
We're going to slide 17. So, and this is where we're going to talk about the 6 criteria that are used to determine if an applicant is eligible to apply for the AVERS program. First of all, they have to have proof of membership in a state or federally recognized tribe. The applicant must reside on or near the reservation or within a designated tribal service area. The applicant must also have a documented physical or mental impairment. And then the next slide.
Sorry, I was reading the chat box.
I know, I was looking at the chat box too. Number 4, the applicant's impairment creates a substantial impediment to employment. Number 5, this is the biggie. And I think this is where, you know, we get so involved in determining eligibility and the disability that we forget to think about, you know, whether the applicant is going to benefit from services. And that is a very key thing, you know, that we need to always, when we're doing the eligibility piece, you know, to make sure that the applicant will benefit from services. And then the final number 6, the applicant requires VR services to prepare for, enter into, engage in, or retain employment consistent with the applicant's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. Or as we say in VR world, the grade 8. And this is where we get to the point where we're going to determine eligibility. And I think Wayne and I talked about putting this little note down there. Always keep in the back of your mind, once eligibility is determined, then the clock starts ticking all over again for IPE development.
So we got a question here. I want to stop before we go into the forms that I'm going to share. We had a question in the chat box about the documents used for verification of residency. And this is what Leah was talking about when we went over the face sheet or the referral form, is that we have to have a physical address to show residency. What was happening is a lot of people were using PO boxes and they were living off a reservation and outside of our determined service area from the grants that or the grant applications that were approved. So under that defined geographical service area, we have to serve people that are living within that boundary. And to do that, we have to show the physical address of the house. And some of the documents that can be used are like in some cases, there's tribal IDs that have physical addresses. If the individual's living there, that you can use that. Anything that shows the physical address of that individual's home. Another thing is I use the emergency office, the emergency disaster office. They had just mapped all of the homes on the reservation in the service area for the 911 dispatch. So they had a fresh, new, wonderful database to use, and we'd send them over to that office. They'd get a letter stating that they lived at that residence. The other thing you can use is Google Maps. If you Google it, your office address, their home address, it gives you the map to their house right away, and it's all, you print it out and you put it in the file. So those are just some ideas. And there's a bunch more that are coming through if you want to read the chat box that they're using. And what if they're homeless? Well, that's where things kind of start to get iffy. Do they have a place of residence that they're staying most often? So I usually would run 1 or 2 residents and have the home, the person that owned the home write a letter with it and get its notarized. Sorry, I lost the word for a minute. Notarized that they are staying there for the most part, or the majority of the time. I would also get a letter from, if you have a homeless shelter or anything like that they stay at, just that type of thing. Then we have a question here, or a statement, Social Security documentation, or even a bill with an address on it. The Social Security information, the only caveat with that is, in word of caution, is if you have a Social Security number, then you have to provide HIPAA as well as confidentiality. And that comes into a different set of regulations that you have to comply with. Now, a lot of us already do that in our offices. Okay, we already have the level of HIPAA compliance required for Social Security numbers. However, there's programs that don't, so you need to be aware of that. If you are going to keep Social Security numbers, you have to step up your levels of protection to the HIPAA requirements. Otherwise, you can stay with confidentiality and the confidential requirements. And that's a whole nother webinar that that would take up another hour and a half to talk about. So we won't do that on this one. Just know that we do have some information. So now we can move on to the samples, the examples. This is an example of an application, and this is where you start to see where we get directions to homes. We have actual street address on this one. We have a birth date, and that's it. There's no Social Security information gathered on this one. It talks about, the marital status, dependents, the telephone numbers, all the demographic stuff is there, tribal enrollment number. So we already are starting to collect that information. That copy goes with the application when it comes in. And now with the application, we have it verified again. And as you go through here, you'll just see the general stuff that is gathered throughout it. One thing I want you to pay attention to is the box on the second page on the right side. It says, I wish to apply for folk rehab. I understand the explanation of services, client assistance program, client rights, informed choice, and that all tribal VR will maintain confidentiality. That statement captures the requirement of us showing that they participated and were aware of all of the different due processes, CAP information, informed choice, and their rights at application. So by having that box and them signing it captures that need and that requirement. And then
Wh-
you know, when you talk about the work history, it doesn't have to be really in depth at this point because it's the application. My work history gets more in depth as I'm doing the case note, because that is what I feel is part of the VR counselor's intake or development of rapport. It requires that in-depth look. On the application, you can just say, you know, they were caught sleeping, they yelled at a customer. Well, in the note, it might be a little deeper, you know, maybe the customer got in his face and pushed him and pushed him and pushed him until he finally, you know, with his mood instabilities, he blew up. We don't know that whole story. That's for the case notes, not for the application. Somebody was going to say something and I kept talking.
That was me, Brenda.
Okay,
From
Brenda, go ahead.
Menominee. I think two questions. Well, what? Not really a question. On this is your application that you use. You're from in Arizona,
Actually, this was from, it was designed from the application I used in Montana.
Montana. Can I ask what database do you use?
I created my own because we were a small enough program that I didn't need to have a database. Since I left, the case numbers have grown and they're looking at 2 of the systems that are available now. So this was all
Yeah, because
created by me.
we just started. We were using Data Ops, and then we switched to Aware.
Okay.
But I know a lot of people out west from going to KNR, out west, tribal voc rehabs use the tribal database. I forget what it is called. Sorry. And I guess my question is because you're pretty simple on this application. Yeah, Sun Eagle, I believe that's what it was called. Thank you, Rachel. Um, and your application is pretty basic. Number one, why do you not put the social security number on here?
Because I didn't want to provide HIPAA. And there's no need for, in our system, for the work that we're doing, we don't need the social security number.
Oh, I guess that was why I asked about the data because with ours, we have to have that social security number or it won't accept the information, the case in the database.
Actually, with Aware, you can type in that same digit number. That's not, I mean, it can be like 111222 and it'll accept it. It doesn't have to be a social security number.
Oh, as long as it has, I see.
Yeah,
But
as long as it has
the number in there.
the 9 digits, yeah.
And I have to say also, I think I'm gonna pass this over to my supervisor, my director, because I like the fact on the bottom here where you have the signature. Because we only have 2, the signature and the counselor's signature. And what I like about this is you have you have the individual's representative on there also, which we don't have that, which in some cases, like in the past year, we've been having a second party along with some of our individuals, but we don't have that on there. So I'm just gonna pass that along and have that put on there. I like that. So thank you.
Yeah, and the other part, you know, like I said earlier, we're creating a whole case file example. So all these forms are going to be available to you to download and use as your program sees fit. So we'll have
We're
all this
always
stuff available.
revising our applications, adding, taking off. I mean, it's just an ongoing process, and everybody knows that.
Yep, for sure.
So,
Always
yeah.
tweaking it.
Yep, always. Thanks.
And so here we have our COE, which several months ago we did a presentation on certificate of eligibility. And again, all this stuff is being designed in this fashion so that we can go virtual with it as well. So it's all computer generated and you can send it for, you know, as needed out to the consumers. This form is for for your case file. It's for your own use. And this captures all the requirements of eligibility, all 6 requirements. It has the language that connects the impediments to employment with the disability. It also has the language that connects the services required to overcome those impediments and remove barriers to gain employment. And at the bottom, you got eligible, not eligible. Are they significantly impaired? Yes or no. And then you sign and date it. This goes in the case file. It identifies that you have determined eligibility by the date required at the top. And then you send out a letter that is sent to the consumer, just saying you're eligible. The next step is working together to create a goal. And we talk about the 90-day time frame in which to develop that plan. And again, this is just a template. This is just an example. Doesn't mean you have to do it this way, but I always had it set up to where we scheduled that next appointment for them, and they knew about it in the congratulation letter. And we also asked for them to contact us if they can't make it to the appointment. We'll reschedule. Okay, so
can I interject real quick?
yeah, you want me to back up?
You can if you want to. It doesn't matter. I wanted to just share with everyone that Winona and I had talked last year about tracking capabilities of the different software systems. And some programs use, a software system to track their caseload, the VR counselors. And then some programs just don't have any system of tracking. And so we developed an Excel spreadsheet that was what we called the 2 and 10 tracker. And that was actually 2 being application status, 10 being eligibility status. And it was a way for you to enter your dates. And when you said the date on the CO, on the certificate of eligibility, that's what made me think about it, Wayne. And we can share it with anyone that wants to use it. I mean, it can just be a desktop form that the counselors use to help them track their cases. But it really helps you to see the date of eligibility requirements, the date of the IPE requirements, the date of, from the date that you sign the application, you just enter that date on that line, and it automatically calculates when your eligibility is due. If you don't have your eligibility done by that date, then you need to do an extension by that date. And then once you enter the eligibility date, then it projects your IPE date. So if anyone wants to use that tracker or is interested in that tracker, we'll be glad to email it to you. Sorry. Public service announcement.
Yeah, and speaking of, like, we had a couple questions about Aware and TVR Systems, I think is what John has named it now. Bocotech, Data Ops, whatever. I don't know the current name. We've kind of been rolling around the idea of seeing if they would come on and do a presentation for us. We'd like to have both of them giving us some information, and because we have a lot of questions coming from you guys on what we're Susie, I just saw your face. You must have just read my note. All right. Anyways, we're working on that. Sorry, I got sidetracked again. Oh man, it's bad today.
Susie, will you email me? Because we're looking for a couple of programs that may want to pilot all of our new materials. And if you're interested in doing that, I would love to talk to you.
Okay, so now I'm back on track, and we are a half hour away from closing. So I'll try and quit talking as much and get through this material so that you guys have time to to ask your questions. Karen just texted or messaged me privately, and I gotta read it to you guys. Would you like a little cheese with your wine, since she's the one that has all the cheese curbside delivered in bulk at her office? No, I don't need wine. I just like cheese. Thanks. All right. So now the next step is step 4, and this is the IPE development. And we're in the IPE, when we start talking about developing it, there's some things that we have to look at. And it's this, again, we have to recognize that informed choice of the consumer. They get to participate. Not that they get to, they're required to participate. It's their plan. And we got to have their buy-in and their commitment to working forward with it to be successful. So we look at the consumer's employment goal, and a lot of times programs think that because the consumer says this is the work goal, that we are stuck doing that work goal, and that's not accurate. The consumer can come forward with any work goal they want and any employment goal they want. But if we find that it's not feasible for our service area and our ability to provide services and also be able to support it in our labor market analysis, we don't have to provide services. We aren't required to provide those services to support that unattainable goal. So it really has to be an attainable goal for employment. We talk about and identify the services that are provided to reach that goal. We talk about all the parties that are coming to the table to help us in providing the services to reach that goal. Then we talk about responsibilities of the consumer, the AVERS staff and the program, and any of the collaborating agencies or comparable benefits or comparable providers. And then we also have to talk about how we're going to measure that progress. And Roy, you're absolutely right. That is a huge component of determining an appropriate work goal, is if it's compatible with the disability they present with. One of the work goals that sticks in my mind the most experience I had is I had a guy that just had gotten out of treatment and he was clean and sober for about 6 months. He came to me and he was like, I want to be a bartender. And I thought, wow, that's not really a good work goal for you. Let's put you in an environment, 6 months, fresh out of treatment, that you're going to be handling, smelling, wiping up alcohol every day. And it's going to be in your environment that you chose to spend a lot of your time. I told him we couldn't do it. It was inappropriate because we couldn't support that work goal. So that's a great thing to point to bring up, Roy. Thank you. The IPE must be designed to provide appropriate VR services for the consumer. We have to take into account the grade 8, and this is also, again, recognizing that informed choice and their right to choose what they want to participate in or have brought into the case. We have to discuss, or we have to make sure the services that we have discussed and agreed to are provided. If we identify it in the IPE, we have to provide it. And again, at this point, I want to make that connection back to the eligibility statement. So when you determine eligibility, you identify specific primary disabilities in that COE, and then you identify services that are removing barriers to employment in that COE. In the IPE, those same services have to be identified again. So you identify them in the COE, you have to provide them in the IPE. You can't not provide them. And you have to provide a copy in writing and in the appropriate mode of communication. So if they want it in their native language, if there's blind and low vision, they need Braille, they need, whatever. It's our responsibility to provide them with that copy. And here's an example of the IPE. So in this one, you'll see that we have the employment goal as a mechanic helper, the IPE end date. So this is the date that we expect the IPE to be completed. It's not the date that we complete services, it's when we complete the IPE. We look at the VR services that are being provided. It identifies the service, it identifies the provider, it identifies the responsible parties, the start and end date of each service, because remember, these services are individualized, so they aren't all block dates. They have to be individualized for the service provision of that date. We have the criteria for measuring progress towards employment. We have the responsibilities of the tribal VR. We have the responsibilities of the consumer. And we have the responsibilities of the other entities or comparable benefits. We have to identify whether the personal assistance services are needed at this time. This is in every IPE. Now, in a lot of IPEs I've seen, there's this huge block under each of these questions, and you don't need it. If what you need to do is address it, so it's yes or no at this point. If it's a yes, then you need to put an explanation of what those services are, who's providing them, and how they're going to help that individual. Until you have a yes, you can just check yes or no boxes. And that's for the personal assistance, assistive technology, and you have to talk about post-employment services at this point. You're required to explain what that means. There's a question here. Do you have space on the form for other payees on the case? State, yes. So that's where we talk about responsibilities of other entities or comparable benefits. And then I mentioned those guys in that section, but I also include them in the VR service. Since they are providing services to assist in the case moving forward, I put their name under the VR service, the provider and the responsible party, and start and end dates and the money that they're bringing to it. Because I think that has to be included in there. So I always included it in those two spaces on the IPE. Then we going on from post-employment, we have to identify supported employment. This is on every case. You got to say yes or no. If you're in a case, and 99.9% of the time in the AVERS world, we say no on the supported employment because we don't have the long-term follow-along funding that's required for this service. However, if we are working with the state, DVR, or we're working with another state program that agrees to pay for that long-term follow-along support, then we would say yes. We would then talk about what extended services are needed, how those extended services are going to impact or be provided to that individual, and then who's going to provide it for the life of the individual. Then you have dates for review of this plan. Now remember, the minimum requirement is an annual review. So once a year, we look at this case. That's the minimal requirements. A lot of people look at these IPEs a lot sooner, a lot more often, but minimally, we have 1 year annual review of the case. We have consumer comments. This is important because the consumer's voice has to be heard in the IPE. That's how we capture the informed choice. That's how we're proving that they're participating. And when I would give this to a consumer, they would say, well, I don't want to write anything. I'd be like, well, tell them I suck or whatever. I don't care. Just put something in there. I want you to write on here something that you feel. And I always use that phrase because it, would get them to giggle a little bit. And maybe some of them thought I did. I don't know. But anyways, it'd get them engaged and they'd write down some stuff. Then we have statements. I have been provided options for assistance. I have been given consent or contact information. I have made the choice I wanted. So, and I've been provided a copy of the plan. So these are all requirements in developing an IPE. We have to show that the individual we've given the individual opportunities for all of these items to be provided to them. And then they sign and date it. And again, then it's however your system works within your program, if the counselor can sign it, if the director needs to sign it too, or a manager, whatever, that is, you guys can adjust those lines. Now, the other side of the second form we're seeing here is a goal rationale. And Jamie, this is my form, but I know you have your own form. I can't remember the name of it.
The RAP, the written rehabilitation analysis page. Yes.
Right. So
same thing. Yes.
And so that will also be available for download for an example, same as this one. The goal rationale is just something that makes sure that you're taking the time to make sure you're meeting all the needs of that consumer. So the goal is compatible. The consumer's perspective and or voice, you want a direct quote from that consumer saying why they want to do this job. Now, for me, I did Employment Outlook. I used direct quotes from ONET online, and that's what I put in there to show the annual job openings and the growth rate of that employment setting. And then it talks about goal compatibility, and this is goal compatibility for John's disability, and how his disability impacts him and his limitations and his abilities. And then the service rationale explains how those services I'm going to provide to John are going to remove his impediments and barriers to employment and allow him to become successfully employed or fully rehabilitated from not being able to be employed.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to go on after the initial development of the IPE. And once the IPE is signed, then we're going to move into the step of the VR process called the provision of services. And so prior to collecting the signatures on the IPE, the VR counselor and the program director, if that is required by your program's policy, are going to consult on some of the following items: the consumer's vocational goal, the VR services, and perhaps vendors identified to address the consumer's barriers to employment, including comparable services and benefits. Also, the beginning and ending service dates. We'll talk more about this in the provision of services training that we are going to be rolling out when you stagger your service dates, and the methods to assess and evaluate consumers' progress, as well as the responsibilities of the AVERS program, the consumer, and any third-party service providers. So upon mutual agreement of the IPE, all of the signatures will be obtained, and this will actually initiate the provision of services. And sorry, we're going to have to roll on through, guys. I just realized we're only about halfway through and we have 15 minutes left. So
Because you
also
talk
during
too much, Jamie.
You've been talking for the last 20 minutes. So the provision of services, once the IPE is signed, the VR counselor really must do the following things. You have to retain the original IPE in the consumer's case file, and you must provide a copy of the IPE to the consumer or their representative. So you want to make sure that you provide this copy of the consumer's rights and responsibilities to them or the representative. And then we're also going to make sure that we provide a formal annual review of the IPE with the AVERS consumer. So we want to make note here that the IPE may be reviewed more often if necessary at the request of the consumer or at the request of the VR counselor, but at minimum, an annual review. And we also assess the consumer's progress in achieving an employment goal during the annual review, and if needed, an amendment to the IPE. So the document, this annual review actually documents in the case record with periodic review and case notes as they occur. And I see we have some comments down here in the chat, and I want to look at them real quick. Susie said we have total case reviews 3 times a year, and then we follow up with our participants after each review period to keep the IPE updated and moving forward. These forms could drive the review dates. And then Ethel says, what's the regulation for case management review? Which I think is the same thing. The periodic review is best practice of 0 to 90 days.
Actually, it's supposed to be 60 to 90, but my keyboard stuck.
I was like, 90 days, really? Thanks,
60 to
Wayne.
90 days, yeah.
So yes, these policies are in place so that, as Susie said, you know, we're keeping this IPE updated and moving forward, and we're also attending to regulation in regards to case management. We can go on to the next slide. So if you get to the point that your IPE must be amended, there's many reasons that an IPE amendment may occur at any time after the IPE has been finalized and approved. So the circumstances which might prompt an amendment may include some of the following. The consumer's employment goal may change. The AVERS services to be provided may change, or the service provider may change. You know, you may have a vendor that's identified for a specific service, and then you have to change the vendor for whatever reason. Also, there may have to be an extension for the IPE completion date. There may be a change in the cost for consumer services. The case status may change, or the consumer's disability could change. These are just a few of many reasons why you must have to complete an IPE amendment.
And so here's an example of an amendment. Again, it captures amendment review of progress, date, the initial, what's the amendment? So we're going to do a traditional healing ceremony, tobacco, prayer cloths, 3 bundles of wood, and food basket for a total of the amended amount of $375. Signature date, because anytime you have an amendment, you have to have a consumer signature agreeing to those services and the providers, again, recognize the informed choice of that individual. And then this goes in the case file with the IPE.
Yes, and then that brings us to the what we hope is the final step of the VR process, step six, which is employment, or what we consider successful closure. So a successful employment outcome is achieved when the AVER services provided under a plan for employment have contributed to the achievement of the employment outcome in the following ways. The consumer has achieved their employment outcome described in the IPE. The employment outcome is consistent with the consumer's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. When the employment outcome is in the most integrated setting possible, consistent with the consumer's informed choice. When the consumer is compensated at or above minimum wage and receives at least the customary wage and benefit level paid to other employees performing similar work for the same employer. When the employment has been maintained for a minimum of 90 consecutive days, and when the employer, consumer, and VR counselor consider the employment placement and consumer performance satisfactory. This is what defines successful closure or employment.
So
Okay.
here's the checklist that we're using. And again, I wanted to go back, successful closure, minimum of 90 days. That individual has to be stable before you put them into the 90-day countdown. You can't get them a job and then start that day. They have to be stable in that employment before you start counting the days. A lot of times we forget about that. So here's a checklist that we came up with, and it's not only a checklist for the successful outcome, but it's also a consultation form because you have to contact those individuals at closure. So the checklist is 90 days, and then I need to change that language. I just realized it has maintained employment for 90 days. I need to put in a minimum. So I missed that. Sorry, I apologize. You have to consult about the closure. The closure letter has been sent. Post-employment services were explained, are not required. And you got client assistance program information reviewed again. The rationale, it just talks about it's, is a position compatible? Is the work environment integrated? Are they getting compensated at or above minimum wage? And then the rationale for significant services provided. We talk about what services are being provided to assist and remove those impediments and barriers. And here's the second to last is consumer has stabilized at the work site. Now here's the part that a lot of us miss and forget to get, and that is the title, where they work, the address, the contact information, their employment date, and how many hours they're working and the wage they're getting. And then the second document is the congratulations letter that I'm closing your case. And on there, we talk about post-employment services again. And then we also have a statement that talks about the due process and what that due process looks like and how you can call your CAP advocate if you need to. And then the step 7 is post-employment. Post-employment services are utilized in helping people maintain or advance their employment after we've closed their case successfully employed. Now, the best practice is 12 months, but there's no language in the CFR that caps that service. And I know we've had several discussions in other webinars about the length of that eligibility for post-employment services. So it goes back to the program policy that you're operating under. Whatever you've established in your policy as far as your length of time is what you'd utilize in determining post-employment services. These services have to be connected to the original employment. You can't be closed in one employment, come back under a new employment, and expect to have new services to maintain or assist in maintaining or advancing in that new employment. It has to be that original employment. And it has to align with the grade 8, and it also has to be connected to maintaining, regaining, or advancing in employment. Okay. I'm going to back up for a second, and because I want to talk about one other thing. Just as a point with post-employment services, over the years, we've come in contact with programs that weren't providing the correct or appropriate post-employment service. And one of the things I want everybody to ask themselves when they get this request is, does everybody else that's working have to pay for this service? And if it is, that's a maintenance cost. That's not a post-employment service allowable cost. So tires, vehicle repairs, oil changes, gas, after case closure, all those things become maintenance costs because everybody that works has to do those things. Now, the only time that isn't true is when it's connected to a training. So if they come in and they say, well, to advance in my employment, I have to go get this training. I need help getting there. I need gas to get there. I need new tires to get there. That type of thing. That can be made into a post-employment service that is allowable because it's disability connected. It's directly connected to maintaining or advancing in that employment. And it's not a general maintenance cost. They aren't coming in saying, you know what, I didn't save money to buy tires. I need tires to get to work. That's a maintenance cost. Everybody has to do that. So notification to consumers at the time of successful closures, we have to inform the individual or the consumer that post-employment services are available. Their right and responsibility to contact us before leaving their job, right? So if they get in a situation, they pick up the phone and say, hey, Wayne, we got some stuff going on, man. And we can get in and help them. And then we always look at the best, they're based upon our AVER's best practices. Okay, so we have to make sure that they've met the successful closure. It's required to maintain or advance in their employment. Again, it's the best practice of 12 months based on your policy. That could be a different number. And these are time limited and limited in scope services. So we aren't going to open up a case and provide 4 months of support. We're talking 30 days, 60 max, or we'd be looking at opening a new case because now we're getting into a length of service provision that would allow us to serve them under an IPE and provide those more in-depth services required to get their job. So we're looking 30 to 60 days at the max, and it's one service. So maybe they need training. They need to go, when they go to that training, they need help with food or shelter or transportation to get to that training. That type of thing is what we're looking for as far as the limited scope and duration. And here's an example of a post-employment service checklist that we've developed. This just goes through and you answer those series of questions that we just talked about. And if this supports that, then you can start providing those post-employment services. Here's an example of a case note that leads to post-employment services. On the one on the left is John coming in and saying he needs this training to advance in his employment. I've called and spoke to Tim to find out this specifically what the training was about. Once it was approved, John brought in the training cost and location. And at the end of it, I agree that this will qualify for post-employment services. And as And as of this case note, we'll be opening the case under post-employment services. So that is the opening of the case. In this case note, it identifies what is happening. The next steps is we complete a post-employment service IPE amendment and we register for the train and reserve the hotel. So that's how we start that process. And then we talk about coming in and signing the post-employment IPE amendment. This is where he gets all the stuff. He's going to bring in the receipts. And again, as with all IPE stuff, it has to be signed by the consumer. If there's any changes, that's why he came in on this date. And here's an example of a post-employment IPE amendment. Again, the date, my initials, it explains what the training that is being provided, and it captures the duration of the training. At the end of the 30 days, I'll review the progress of the consumer to determine if these services assisted John in advancing in his employment. There's the cost of it. And then the next one is an example of John following through with everything, bringing it in. And I asked him to check in with me and just give me his work progress. And the next step is checking with me in the next week. He provided his update. I informed John that due to his success in advancing and maintaining his employment, I'm going to close his case, post-employment services. So that's it. I mean, that's all you have to do. Oops.
Joanne has a question I want to address real quick. And I know we're out of time, but she said, how do we document the 90 days employment if the consumer or participant applied for services and is already employed full-time? So I'm assuming that the employment goal is to obtain or maintain their current employment. Is that correct, Joanna? Can you turn on your camera and talk to us?
So again, we're starting to get feedback in here. What is a barrier to employment if already employed? So I think that's the caveat here that we have to look at. How do we document the 90 days employment of the consumer applied for service and already employed full time? In that situation, we have to look at, are they even eligible for the program? I mean, this goes all the way back to eligibility. If they're working full time, and what barriers are coming up to keep them from maintaining that employment? How come they require VR services to obtain, maintain, or advance in employment? So that's a deeper question of eligibility. Is it appropriate to work with that individual? Sometimes it is. Sometimes people are working in situations or in jobs that are in a direct disagreement with their disability and their abilities. And it's actually creating more substantial issues for them. At that point, we can help them, shift gears, go into a new position and find a new job. But if they're working full-time and they're able to maintain that employment, they're not eligible for VR services because they don't require our assistance in getting employment. So I guess I would need more information, Joanna, and if you could email me after the webinar, I'd be really more than happy to help walk through this question with you in more in depth. I get some other questions there. A question about advancement in employment. I think
maintaining. Yeah, and we're out of time today, unfortunately, but we definitely want to address these questions in the employment section of the VR process training. But yes, to quickly answer those questions, yes, they can apply to advance in employment and to maintain employment. But as Wayne said, there has to be an impairment that is a barrier. And so that needs to be addressed first and foremost. So let's talk about saving the dates. We have a lot coming up really soon. November 4th, we have a talking circle, onboarding for new AVERS staff and VR process. That is November 4th, and you'll see a registration coming out. We also have another webinar on November 18th, the development of policies and procedures with Wayne and myself. We have another webinar, Consumer Informed Choice, on December 2nd. And then we have a talking circle December 16th to follow up on the webinar for development of policy and procedures and for consumer informed choice. So please join us. We'd love for you to participate. We really enjoy the feedback and the conversation and the discussions. And I think a lot of people hesitate to ask questions, but I guarantee you other people are thinking and in themselves, they may have the very same question that you asked. So if you could complete today's webinar survey, it is right here. Here's the link to it. And I think John is going to put the link to that survey in the chat box. And we just want to thank everyone for your participation today. And please continue to register for these webinars, because you will be learning more about the VR process and other areas of service provision. Thank you,
Remember,
everyone.
if you're signed in with just a phone number, please put your name in the chat box so that we can track who's on and who's not, and make sure that we got you on our listserv.